I know we still have people joining us, but we're about 3 minutes past the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So today we're very lucky to be joined by Rachel Stevens, Director of Programs for RedRover. And she's going to be talking to us about basically the ins and outs of the RedRover Safe Housing Grant Program. And that program offers up to $60,000 in funding to help support the creation of pet housing programs for survivors of domestic abuse. She's also going to be providing more details on the new funding opportunity that's now available to homeless shelters this year. So if you're joining us from a homeless shelter or housing services agency, we're so excited to have you here. And Rachel will have lots of information for you because I know that part of the grant is relatively new. So in order to not waste any more time, Rachel, please take it away. And if anyone has any questions, please, again, feel free to enter them in the chat.
Thank you, Danielle. I'm not quite sure how, but I think we have some drawings on the slides that popped up. Those just happened to appear. I don't know how that happened, but
Let me see, Rachel, if I can get rid of those, but why don't you go ahead and continue and I'll see if I can't get those erased.
Okay, thanks, Danielle. Hi, everyone. So thank you so much for joining us today to learn more about our safe housing grants. As Danielle mentioned, I'm Rachel Stevens, Director of Programs here at RedRover, and I oversee these domestic violence grants. As she mentioned, we will have time at the end to answer questions, and we would love to hear any thoughts, any questions that you have. So feel free to pop that in the chat, and we'll either address it in the chat if we can, or answer them at the end of the presentation. A little background on RedRover. We are a national nonprofit based in Sacramento, California, and we were founded in 1987. We originally started out as United Animal Nations, and we had more of an international focus on animal welfare. But over the years, our programs have evolved to focus in the US and parts of Canada, as that's where we have found that we can have the greatest impact. Then in 2011 is when we rebranded as RedRover, and we've been working hard ever since then to expand our programs, bring animals from crisis to care, and strengthen the bond between people and animals. And how do we do that? We do that through our three main programs. So we have our RedRover Readers program, which is where we actually help children build empathy for animals and people alike. Under this program is Kind News, which is a really neat animal-themed children's magazine designed for classrooms and homes. And this magazine inspires kids to be curious, helpful, kind to people and pets. Our second program is our RedRover Responders program, and that's actually our volunteer program. Under this, we provide temporary emergency shelter for pets during situations such as natural disasters, large-scale cruelty situations like puppy mills. We've responded to things such as Hurricane Katrina, the Camp Fire, and many other disasters, unfortunately, that have happened over the years. And under this program, our volunteers actually have been able to help build some of the pet-friendly spaces at domestic violence shelters that some of our safe housing grant recipients have done. So that has been wonderful to expand in that area as well. We've also expanded our program to include more community program needs. So we also assist with unchaining programs, vaccine clinics, spay-neuter clinics. So that's been really fun to expand into as well. And since 1987, we've deployed our staff and volunteers more than 200 times, and we have currently over 4,000 volunteers throughout the US and Canada. And then lastly, that leaves our RedRover Relief Program. Now, under this program, we have a few different financial assistance programs. So we have Our urgent care grants, which provide financial and emotional support for pet owners who are in need of emergency veterinary care for their pets. And then, of course, we have our domestic violence grants, which is what we're all going to be talking about today, which help domestic violence survivors ultimately find safety with their pets. So, Red Rover offers multiple resources to help survivors of domestic violence. We have our Safe Escape grants and our Safe Housing grants, which help to cover the cost of keeping pets safe and able to find safety with their families. And then we also offer don'tforgetthepets.org, which is, of course, something you guys know about. It's a collaboration with Greater Good Charities Rescue Rebuild program that offers free guidance, free expertise, one-on-one coaching, and resources, all to organizations who are looking to make a pet program of their own. It is truly such an amazing resource that we're really, really happy to provide. And a little bit of background on why Red Rover has become so passionate about offering assistance to domestic violence survivors and their pets. So these statistics, are really powerful. 71% of pet owning women entering shelter have reported animal abuse, and between 20 to 48 of survivors have reported delaying leaving an abusive situation for fear of leaving their pet with their abuser. And unfortunately, up to 25% of survivors have reported they've actually returned to their abuser out of concern for their pet. Uh, we know that up to 70% of DV survivors report having a pet. And as we can see from these numbers, a majority of homes where pets are present have seen the pets being abused. So as a result, survivors are going to do anything, to not leave their pets behind. They're going to live in their cars if they can't bring their pets to shelter or have a safe place for their pet if they're going into shelter. So that is why we have gotten so passionate about really offering assistance so that they can escape abuse together. And heartbreakingly, these numbers show that when children witness abuse, they're more likely to abuse. So, being able to help parents and the greater community model caring behavior for their pets seems especially crucial in these situations. Now, we launched our Safe Escape grants back in 2007, and these grants provide funding to board someone's pet while they're staying at a domestic violence shelter where unfortunately the shelter won't accept pets. It took a few years for word to spread that we were offering this kind of assistance, but by now, outreach and word of mouth have done an amazing job, and applications have been steadily coming in for over a decade. Uh, Actually, due to an overwhelming amount of applications, we've had to modify the program starting in 2025. So we have now had to cap the length of boarding at 30 days, and that is due to just the sheer number of applications we are seeing coming in. Um, and that's really why we came to realize that the Safe Escape grants are clearly very needed and very useful, but they weren't addressing the underlying issue of making it safe and easy for survivors to find safety with their pets. And that is why we decided to help the shelters themselves create their own pet housing programs. And that is where we came to our safe housing grants, which is, of course, the reason that we're all here today. So, as I mentioned, these grants were started because we saw that the need for Safe Escape grants were steadily increasing, but we were the only national resource providing that kind of help. So, we could see how that program could become completely unsustainable without help from the domestic violence organizations themselves. Our first initial safe housing grants were back in 2012, and they were pretty small. They were up to $2,000. And this was mostly to help the shelters purchase crates and little supplies in order to quickly and easily be able to make safe spaces in their shelter for pets. In 2014, the grant amount was increased up to $6,000. And we started seeing more shelters building some outdoor kennel spaces or changing out the flooring in their rooms in order to make the rooms pet friendly and easier to clean. And just, of course, still having those crates for the small animals and the short-term care. In 2016 is when we first collaborated with Greater Good Charities Rescue Rebuild program in order to make a domestic violence shelter pet friendly. So they provided the expertise and the know-how. We provided some of our volunteers, and that's where our volunteer program was able to expand into helping create pet friendly spaces. And this collaboration really helped us to see the growth potential for our safe housing program. And then in 2017, a very generous donor made it possible to increase the grants up to $20,000, which really expanded the kinds of projects that the grant could help with. So we saw a great increase in room renovations. We started seeing plans for actual kennel buildings, indoor and outdoor spaces separate from shelter, but on the same property. We saw projects to elevate the standard of care for pets that were being housed. So along with pet-friendly rooms, shelters were actually adding in fenced-in play areas or even cat spaces where cats could get out to play safely. And of course, these more ambitious projects allowed us for more collaboration with Rescue Rebuild, which was very exciting. Then in 2019, we were very fortunate to start a partnership with Purina, which is now called the Purple Leash Project. This partnership not only afforded us the opportunity to continue to grow the safe housing grants, but to greatly expand the reach of our message. Because of Purina and the Purple Leash Project, so many more people across the country are now aware of the connection between pets and domestic violence. And they're aware that unfortunately there's a lack of pet-friendly spaces at some domestic violence shelters. But they're more aware of the importance of helping survivors and their pets escape abuse together. And this increased awareness brought some increased interest in our grant from animal organizations within the communities. They were wanting to know what they could do to help. And Rescue Rebuild's actual main focus previously was helping animal organizations. And so with that collaboration, we started to see that limiting our grants to only domestic violence shelters was actually limiting the amount of help available to survivors and their pets within their community. There are some domestic violence shelters that just won't be able to offer a pet program. And so having another organization in their community set up to offer that safe space, confidential pet care, it just seems like a great alternative in those situations. And the animal organizations were really interested in helping. So we decided to open up our safe housing grants to animal organizations back in 2020. And the response has been amazing. About a third of the grants we've provided have been to animal organizations since we've expanded to that. And one of the great things about animal organizations helping offering domestic violence assistance for pets is that they can offer that assistance for the entire community, right? So not just one shelter. They can really essentially offer that for anyone in the community that needs it, that's a domestic violence survivor. So as you've seen, our safe housing grants have changed quite a bit since they've first been offered in 2012. Our grants are actually now up to $60,000, and we have 3 application deadlines per year: March 1st, June 1st, and September 1st. And we've really tried to design these grants with flexibility in mind so that each pet program is designed to best meet the needs of that specific community. And here is a testimonial from a safe housing grant recipient. Do not be tempted to view this project as just something else on your to-do list. It is important and may make all the difference in a victim's decision to leave or stay. These programs truly eliminate barriers to safety. They keep people and their pets safe from abuse, and they help facilitate healing. We've heard from multiple grant recipients really heartbreaking stories of clients who are in shelter with their pets, but don't believe they would be alive today if the shelter hadn't accepted them with their pets. They wouldn't have left the dangerous situation they were in, and they truly credit the pet housing programs with saving their lives. And now we can dive a little deeper into our actual safe housing grant process. You will find this pre-application checklist on our website at redrover.org/safe housing. This is all there. So, don't feel like you have to write this down. This is all on the website. And plus, Danielle will be sending you the slides after. But in addition to helping people and pets find safety together, these grants are truly meant to help you build collaborative relationships within your community. So we do expect domestic violence shelters to work with an animal organization in their community to identify the needs for services and find the best ways to fill them. We also would like you to work with a veterinary clinic within your community, and that might be provided by your animal organization. But if it's not, we recommend reaching out to other vet clinics in your community and forming a partnership with them. And we will get into what kind of documentation we'll need in just a little bit. We also suggest reaching out to other community organizations. Reach out to your local Girl Scouts, your local pet stores, your local places of worship. I think you'll be surprised to see that some of these places may be able to fill some program needs through donations or community service. So, going through this checklist, we do require you to be ready to start your pet program within 12 months or less of applying. You must have a detailed program plan and budget, along with an MOU from a partner organization. So, a domestic violence shelter that's applying will need to partner with an animal organization. If an animal organization is applying, they need to partner with a domestic violence organization. You'll need to identify a veterinary partner if that can't be provided by your animal org partner. And of course, you'll need to ensure that your program will meet all relevant animal ordinances and laws, verify that you have the ability to obtain permits or other authorizations that are needed. And we do require that you have already spoken with a contractor if necessary, and received estimates or quotes for your renovations. Now, a couple notes on what we cannot help with. So we can't help with salaries. We don't help with advertising. We don't help with training. We don't help with real estate purchases or any rent. And then this piece is pretty important. So our grants are not meant to sustain an existing pet program. So if you have an existing pet program, that is absolutely incredible. We are so happy that you have decided to prioritize pets. And you are welcome to apply if you are expanding your capacity for pets. So if this grant is going to expand the number of pets that you are able to house per year, you are welcome to apply. If you are just simply looking for, funding to sustain your existing program, that's great. Unfortunately, this grant is not meant for that. Now, there are a few required documents that you'll need to attach to your application, and we go through all of this on the website. But you will need to attach your project budget. We have a handy dandy budget template that we'd love you to use that is also on the website. And we'll go through that in a little bit. You'll want to submit a project timeline, your IRS letter of determination showing you're a nonprofit, and your MOU with your partner organization that is signed by both parties. And then, of course, estimates to support your budget asks. So if you're asking for veterinary care funds, you'll want to provide a veterinary estimate. If you're asking for renovation funds, you'll want to provide quotes or estimates from your contractor or wherever you're getting those estimates from. And now we will go over a few example documents of an MOU and a budget. So this is a fantastic MOU between a domestic violence shelter and an animal organization. And I'll go into the details on the next slide. But essentially, this MOU clearly details each organization's duties and responsibilities. It specifies which services will be provided at no charge and which ones may require funding. So in this case, the animal organization is agreeing to house pets that the domestic violence shelter can't house on site for whatever reason. And it clearly outlines the care that will be provided at no cost. It also states that veterinary care or vaccines may require funding or reimbursement. It also specifies whether the survivor can visit their pet, which I think is a great piece to include in there. And it outlines which documentation informs how that process will work. So what documentation, what forms are going to be needed. So in this case, a consent and release form will be needed. That addresses confidentiality concerns in the MOU. And then, of course, it's signed by both organizations, which is something we're also looking for. So for this sample MOU, other sample documents like MOUs, intake forms, consent and release forms, don't Forget the Pets is your place to go. So there's a resource library on don'tforgetthepets.org, and that has all the sample documentation there, and it is a fabulous resource for you guys to utilize. And I'm sure we will share that link with you in the chat. And now here is an example of a pretty simple pet program budget. So it may sound silly, but the first thing to do is double check that your math adds up. Now, if you use our budget template, it kind of does it for you. But just double check that the amount requested in your budget is the same amount requested in your application. And in this specific example budget, you can see it is clear what each cost is for. It details the cost per pet when appropriate, such as the vaccines, $100 per pet, and they anticipate 10 pets. It clearly shows which items are already covered with other funding and which ones are being requested under this safe housing grant. And then, of course, like I mentioned earlier, we will require you to supply quotes and estimates that support these budget asks. If you don't attach those to your initial application, we may come to you during the processing of your application and ask to see those documents, those supporting quotes. Now, here are some items we do typically see requested. Renovation costs. So are you renovating your rooms to be pet friendly, replacing flooring, painting, all of those good things. Veterinary care costs. So do you anticipate to be offering vaccines for pets? What about spay and neuter? What about an emergency vet care fund, just in case that a pet comes in injured or something happens while they're in shelter? We can definitely, we want to see the ER costs separate from the veterinary costs. So feel free to just itemize everything. Veterinary costs broken down by vaccines for the number of pets, spay and neuter, all of these things. The more detailed, the better. We love it. Other things we see, pet supplies, of course, pet food, and then even things like pet deposits. So when your survivors are moving on from shelter with their pets, they're likely going to have to pay a pet deposit at their pet-friendly housing that they find. So that can actually be included in your safe housing grant budget. What not to include in your budget, which I did touch on earlier: salaries, advertising, training, real estate purchases, rent, your shelter's utilities, and then existing program costs that are not expanding capacity for pets. So again, you're welcome to apply if the number of pets that you're able to house is going to increase. You're adding rooms, you're adding an outdoor kennel, you're adding more space for pets. Then you're welcome to apply. But if it's for sustaining your existing program, that is something that unfortunately we are not able to provide. And this is all also on the website. So while reviewing applications, we are really looking for shelters to demonstrate the need within their community. And then tell us how you've determined your estimated number of pets. So have you done a survey? Did you track calls to your hotline that mention pets? Are you currently tracking the number of people and pets you've had to turn away because you unfortunately, haven't had a pet program yet? Tell us all of those things in your application. And then if you're an animal organization that will house pets from, say, other crisis situations in addition to domestic violence, which is very, very common, just make sure that you're focusing on the domestic violence portion of your pet program within your application. We are, of course, thrilled that you would be able to house, pets for people in other crisis situations. But for this specific grant, just make sure you're specifically outlining what percentage of your numbers are going to be domestic violence pets. And then one very exciting development is the addition of our Safe Housing Homeless Shelter pilot program. So we've actually talked about this for years, that we would love to expand our assistance to be able to help domestic violence survivors who are staying in homeless shelters, because as we all know, there's a lot of crossover between domestic violence and homelessness. Until now, the funding was simply not there for us to be able to expand. But last year, we were able to launch this pilot program, and we did provide a few grants in March of 2024. And luckily, we can provide grants again in 2025. So the goal of this pilot program is specifically for on-site pet programs at homeless shelters. There can be foster and boarding components to the overall program, but the ultimate goal will be to keep people and their pets together at the shelter. And this came from a lot of research and understanding that for many homeless, as we all know, their pet is truly their main source of companionship, of comfort, of safety, of love. And we have found that they will be less likely to take advantage of the program if they can't stay together with their pet. So we are looking for programs that are going to be doing on-site housing at the shelter. And we do have $300,000 for this pilot program. So we're going to be able to offer 5 grants up to $60,000. And these are due at our March 1st deadline. And if for some reason we don't receive, enough applications, then we will expand into our next deadline, which is June 1st. And the guidelines for this grant is the exact same as our regular domestic violence safe housing program. So same documentation needed, same guidelines, it's all on our website. However, there is a separate application. So be sure to make sure you are choosing the homeless shelter pilot grant application. You'll see there's 2 buttons at the bottom. But that is all listed on redrover.org/safehousing. And then here's a little reminder of why we are all here today and the amazing work that you all are doing. This is a quote from one of our safe housing grant recipients. So they said, "The people heal the pets and the pets heal the people. It is worth any extra work on the end of the shelter." And then just a little bit about our Safe Housing Grants impact. We have actually provided over $5.2 million to support domestic violence survivors and their pets through 237 grants. These grants help nearly 5,000 pets annually, more than 4,000 survivors annually, and have provided an estimated more than 700,000 nights of safety for pets since 2012, which is a pretty amazing number. And as you can see, our safe housing grants have certainly had an impact. But when we partnered with Purina, we actually decided to set a new goal for ourselves. So we set a goal of seeing 25% of domestic violence shelters become pet friendly by 2025. Which it is now 2025. And so this goal is through the end of this year. It's definitely an ambitious goal, but we've already come so far. When I first started working at Red Rover over 10 years ago, only about 3% of domestic violence shelters were pet friendly throughout the US. Now, currently, over 19% of shelters are able to accept survivors with their pets. So we're working hard to get close to that 25%. And we really hope that you will all join us in this exciting goal and be part of the first 25%. And then lastly, I wanted to share a few resources that we do have available on our website. We have posters available that are mainly geared towards survivor outreach. These can be hung in public places like a veterinary office, a doctor's office, a restroom. They talk about the signs of abuse. They help survivors find pet-friendly domestic violence shelters near them and gives the National Domestic Violence Hotline information. And all of these are available for download or request at redrover.org/dvhelp. So if you'd like to reach out to learn more or have specific questions for us, please don't hesitate to reach out. I've included my specific email as well as our relief grants email. So either one will work, and I'd be happy to answer your questions via email. If you would not want to put them in the chat, or you don't want to, call out any questions at the end, please email me. I'd be happy to get back to you. And I just want to thank you all for attending this webinar. I hope it provided some more insight into our safe housing grant process. And we're excited to see your applications at a future deadline. And now I'll kick it back over to you, Daniel.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Rachel. That was so informative. And we have a lot of questions already entered in the chat. So I think we will have plenty for our Q&A. That Q&A, though, is still open. So still feel free to enter additional questions in the chat. We'll start with the questions that have already been entered, and then we'll have time for anyone who wants to have more of a conversation or ask their question live. Really quickly, though, I think Rachel, is our next slide, does that talk about upcoming events?
This one.
There we go. Thank you so much. So just so everyone knows, we do have offer additional programming through our Don't Forget the Pets program, and we have a few different opportunities coming up. So next is going to be our virtual workshop on February 27th. That is going to be also on Zoom, but that is our full informational workshop and is going to run from 8 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We also have an in-person workshop scheduled for Columbus, Ohio on March 12th. So if you are in that area, we definitely would love to have you join us. And then additional webinars like this one, these are sort of 1-hour guest presentations. On March 20th, we have Keeping Families Together, the Impact of Co-Sheltering. And that will be with our guest presenters from My Dog Is My Home. And you can find all of those events and register for them at don'tforgetthepets.org/events. And then my colleague Tia is also going to share an additional opportunity related to our safe housing funding. And then we're going to dive into our questions. Tia, do you want to hop on?
Yeah, thanks, Danielle. So I'm putting in the chat right now a sign-up form. We'll be hosting a safe housing grant Q&A session pretty soon on February 6th. So if you are working on your application over the next couple weeks and you have some more questions, you can meet directly with our grants team, and you can pop into that 1 hour session at any time during the hour and ask your questions.
Awesome.
Thanks, Danielle.
Yeah, thanks, Tia. Yeah, I know we have a lot of great questions today, but additional questions can pop up as you look at the application and start working through it. So that's a great opportunity to get some additional help as you move through that application. So now we'll go ahead and jump right into some of the questions that we already received in the chat. So we'll start right off with the first one, which was from Virginia. Rachel, can the animal organization partner that you mentioned be the veterinarian?
Yes, it can. We will accept applications that do partner with the veterinary clinic as their animal organization. Ideally, it would be a nonprofit animal organization within your community. That's truly what the most ideal situation would be. But we have provided grants where someone, that just simply isn't possible because there isn't an animal shelter within their community. And we have allowed the veterinary clinic to be the partner.
Awesome. Thanks, Rachel. And then just for clarity for anyone that's curious in the other direction, Rachel, if their local animal welfare partner has veterinary services available, can that partner fulfill that veterinary piece?
Absolutely, yes.
Perfect. All right. Question from Luz. We are a housing shelter with an existing pet program and are expanding to include cats and additional dogs. We are not, however, specifically focused on DV victims. Do you need to establish a DV partnership to apply for our expansion?
Yes, I would need clarity on, I guess, the specific type of shelter. Is this I think I would need clarity on the situation, but we are specific to domestic violence shelters. So we would just need more information, I think.
Luz, I did
Oh, excuse me. So
ask.
sorry, I'm here.
Hi.
We are a shelter that accepts we are the only shelter in North Texas that accepts single men over the age of 25. So basically all ages. We accept pets and now cats. But we do have legally we are not trained to specifically focus on domestic violence victims. There have been some who disclose and they still remain on the shelter. It's not saying that we don't, but we don't have that focus. So do we have to have a formal MOU with a domestic violence shelter specifically, or do we just find a way to target the DV, the self-identified clients already in our organization?
Okay. I think just based on what I'm hearing, we would want a specific partnership with a domestic violence shelter, but we can talk more. So maybe let's connect offline, and we can talk more, and you can perhaps I can look at your website, and we can really dive into what would be needed.
And that specifically, Rachel, is if they wanted to go for the DV shelter grant as opposed to the homeless shelter grant. It sounds almost like they would be the homeless shelter pilot grant would be a better fit.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. If you're more classifying as a homeless shelter, and then of course there's crossover with domestic violence survivors staying in your shelter. It sounds like that might be the case. So that specific application might be more applicable to your shelter. And it did sound like you were expanding your capacity for pets, which is wonderful.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Rachel. Question from Danielle, a fellow Danielle, not me. Danielle says, we currently have a room for pets in our DV shelter, but want to expand with kennels outside. Would that be allowed with this funding?
Yes, absolutely. So if you're expanding the number of pets that you're able to house, definitely you are welcome to apply. That's wonderful.
Awesome. Question from Allison. I run the only emergency homeless shelter in our area that will allow dogs, and we own and operate affordable permanent housing that allows pets without a pet deposit. We currently do not have a specific program for just dogs, and we serve those who are DV survivors, but are not only a DV provider. Tricky. Would this grant allow us to help folks get into housing by paying pet deposits and paying for vaccines and vet care for our emergency shelter clients?
Okay, so it sounds like this homeless shelter is asking specifically about the homeless shelter grants. So, with the homeless shelter grants, I do want to make it clear, you don't have to be partnering with a domestic violence shelter. So I think there was some confusion, and I apologize on that. So the homeless shelter grants, we treat them the same as a domestic violence shelter. So you actually need to be partnering with an animal organization within your community. So anyways, just wanted to clear that up first. Secondly, that is amazing, the work that you are doing. So thank you for that. We would still want to see an existing program expanding their capacity for pets if they are applying. So we do still want to see your homeless shelter be able to house additional pets if you are applying for a grant. So it sounds like you're looking for vet care costs, which you can definitely add on to the budget, and well, not pet deposits, because you didn't need pet deposits, which is great. But we do want to see the number of pets being increased if you are applying. And I hope that addressed the question.
I think it did. Thanks so much, Rachel. Let's see here. Question from Holly. We have just broken ground on an emergency people shelter, and we want to build space for pets to be co-located with it. But we are probably more than 12 months from opening the people shelter. Is it better to wait until next year to apply?
That's a very good question, because I know that I know that this is limited funding this year. And so you're probably anxious to get your application in. My question would be, about how long are you thinking? Is it really close to those 12 months, or is it looking like a couple years out? We are really hoping to be able to offer these grants in the future. So I would say if it's a ways out, hold off, because we really do want to be able to provide grants when you're going to be operating within that 12-month period. So it may be best to submit in 2026.
Okay, I'm just going to come off mute and follow up. I think we're going to, they're hoping on opening in spring of 2026. But I think my follow-up question to that is talking about the eligibility. We're a governmental run animal shelter, and our kind of counterpart, our human services department, are the ones that are opening I'm going to call it a people shelter, because if I say shelter, I'm going to think animal shelter. So our people shelter. And so this is a joint project, but we're not technically a nonprofit. We're governmental. So I don't know if we are still eligible.
So would you be the one submitting the application, or is the human shelter going to be the one submitting the application?
Well, we're both governmental agencies. We're both different departments within the county.
Okay, we do require only nonprofit organizations to apply. So what we've seen in the past is typically there's like a nonprofit arm connected with like in where I'm located. There is. Do you have a nonprofit arm connected with your shelter?
We do. I just don't know that they would want to take on this big of a project.
Yeah.
But that's something we can discuss internally. So that gives us a good starting point to know our internal discussions. So
yes.
Great. Thank you.
Yes.
Awesome. Thanks, Rachel. Let's take a look here. Let me scroll back up. This is a helpful question just about funding amount from Erin. Are the homeless shelter grants also $60,000. Is that
Yes.
perfect? And then another question, you mentioned that you will award 5 grants for $60,000 for the homeless shelter pilot program. Did you mention how many grants will be awarded for the DV grant program?
No, so that isn't as strict to the number that we're able to provide. So that will simply depend on the type of applications that we receive.
Perfect. Another question from a DV shelter. We are a DV shelter with an existing pet program, but have had to nearly stop accepting pets because most pets who come to our shelter need vet care or vaccines. We do not have funds for either. Can we apply for a safe housing grant so that we can begin accepting pets again, thereby making us a functioning pet program again?
If you have stopped accepting pets because of this reason, you are welcome to apply, but just with the caveat that we really are looking for applications where you're expanding your capacity for pets. But if this is impacting you to the point where you're going to have to stop accepting pets, then technically it would be expanding your capacity for pets. So you're welcome to apply. I know it's tricky, and I'm sorry for, harboring on this point. And I know there's situations, there's lots of gray areas. So if you don't have a formal pet program and you really are going to stop accepting pets because of this need, then you're welcome to apply. And perhaps we can also think ahead of the application. Is there more that you need for your grant ask? Do you need to, or could you make a few more rooms pet friendly or create kennels on site or things like that? So really looking at how to formalize your pet program, I think that will help you almost probably expand your capacity naturally. And then that will be included in the application too.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Rachel. Let's see. If we are awarded the grant, is there a chance that we could have some Red Rover people come and help us build in the heart of Kansas?
Maybe you should touch on that, Danielle or Tia, in regards to Greater Good Charities Rescue Rebuild Program.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to. So that's a great question and sort of a complicated question. So as Rachel mentioned earlier, we have in the past, our Red Rover Responders team has in the past and will continue to do some partner projects with another organization called Greater Good Charities, specifically their Rescue Rebuild program. However, we never send our responders to do build projects by themselves. We always need to be partnering with Greater Good Charities Rescue Rebuild because they have the renovation expertise. So getting a grant from Red Rover, a monetary grant from Red Rover, is absolutely not a guarantee that we will come out and do physical work for you. Typically, when those projects happen, it is when a shelter has received both a monetary grant from Red Rover as well as a Build With You renovation grant from Greater Good Charities Rescue Rebuild. So you would need to apply that as a separate application and a separate organization. And those are typically the situations where we will send out volunteers to assist in that build, is when a shelter has also received, or rather been awarded, a grant from Greater Good Charities Rescue Rebuild. I hope that makes sense. All right, let's take a look. This is a great question. I'm sure a lot of people have this question. I don't know if you have an answer to it just yet, Rachel, but do you anticipate offering the safe housing grant for homeless shelters again next year? Like another attendee, we are in the process of reaching out to potential vet partners for our shelter network. So it sounds like they're not ready to apply just yet and are wondering if funding will be available in the future.
Absolutely understand. Unfortunately, I cannot guarantee that funding will be available in the future, but let's just say I am very hopeful that we will be able to offer this funding again. And I'm sorry that I cannot guarantee it, but we are hopeful, and we've been able to offer it 2 years now. So we are very hopeful that we will be able to offer it again.
Awesome. All right, this is kind of a long question. I think it's a good question, but I think there might be a misunderstanding here about what we mean by a veterinary partner and vet services. So the question is, for homeless shelters, are you requiring them to offer veterinary services? You said they have the same rules to apply. But there are homeless shelters who want to house pets, but do not have the knowledge, experience, or capacity to also offer veterinary services with a veterinarian. They want to offer housing, but are overwhelmed with the thought of dealing with a vet hospital. Can a homeless shelter receive a grant if they don't offer vet services? If the money would only be going to adding pets on site?
Gotcha. Okay. So you do not have to include veterinary services costs in your grant budget ask. You do not have to ask to include veterinary care services for us to provide those funds. What we do require is for a human organization, whether that be a DV shelter or a homeless shelter, to partner with an animal organization within your community, because we are really looking to build those collaborative relationships within your community through these grants. So what that means is, as a homeless shelter, you will need to find and partner with an animal organization within your community. That can be your local animal shelter, or whatever is available within your community. And you will need to establish an MOU with them. And you might be wondering what that MOU will look like, but really it's for things such as backup care. If for whatever reason you're not able to house a pet on site and the person is willing to be in your shelter and allow the pet to be boarded off site, that can be something that your animal organization provides. Veterinary care is another thing that perhaps the animal organization could provide, but isn't necessarily required to be a part of the grant ask. Does that make sense? But we are looking for that partnership between the shelter that's housing people and the animal organization within their community.
Perfect. Another question. This person says, we are a day shelter. We
Mm.
need 30-day boarding for pets that our participants who agree to go to treatment. I think they mean for our participants who agree to go to treatment for addiction. This is for our homeless population pets while they are unhoused.
Okay, and the question is whether or not they would be qualifying for the grant?
I think so. So I think it's unclear to me, and if the person who answered this question, I'm so sorry, I don't have your name in front of me, but if you'd like to unmute, it sounds to me like you may be a homeless shelter or you may be a treatment facility. But regardless, that it's that 30 days of addiction treatment that you're wanting to sort of bridge that gap where that person is receiving treatment for 30 days and their pet needs somewhere to go. So it sounds like the question is boarding for 30 days eligible, an eligible expense for safe housing funds, especially since in this situation, it sounds like it wouldn't be on site. It would be.
Got it. Okay. So unfortunately, the homeless shelter grants are designed for an on-site pet program. Like I mentioned, there can be components where, if a foster is needed or a boarding is needed here and there, that can be part of the components. But really, the primary program does have to be on-site at the shelter, keeping the person with their pet. And that is, yeah.
Thanks, Rachel. And then someone else asked for, I think, some additional clarity. Is this funding specifically for domestic violence shelters? Could you clarify? Because of course, other shelters house survivors since it's one of the leading causes of homelessness. So I think, again, maybe we need to clarify that today, Rachel is presenting on two separate grant opportunities, a grant opportunities for domestic violence shelters, and then a grant opportunity for homeless shelters.
Yes. So we've always been very specifically funding domestic violence shelters over the years and have had to be specific just due to limited budgets and whatnot. Now we have additional funding that is specific to homeless shelters. So there are two avenues, like Danielle was saying, on our website. There is our safe housing grants for domestic violence shelters and or animal organizations who are partnering with a domestic violence shelter. And then there is a separate application for homeless shelters who are looking to create pet housing programs at their shelter.
Perfect. Thanks, Rachel. This is a great question and it comes up a lot. It's a question about emotional support animals and service animals. So from Elena, she says, we are a homeless shelter that currently only accepts pets if they are service animals or emotional support animals. Let's dig into that language a little bit real quick, Elena. So for our purposes, for Red Rover, and don't forget the pets, emotional support animals and service animals are not pets. They are a different type of animal companion that we use for a service. So if you see anything with the word pets or companion animals in our grant applications or other materials, we are specifically not referring to service animals or emotional support animals. But let's continue on with your question because this comes up a lot. So it's a great question. We have a behavioral health clinician who writes letters designating pets as ESAs. Would we be required to expand our eligibility to accept all pets? We have never actually turned anyone away who wanted to bring a pet.
That's wonderful that you've actually never turned anyone away. But yes, we would be requiring you to accept companion animals that are not ESAs or service animals.
Perfect. Thanks, Rachel. Oh, great question, Elena. Would you consider awarding grants for requests under $60,000, or do the awards have to be exactly $60,000?
That is a great question. Absolutely, you can request less than $60,000. We have accepted and granted grants, all kinds of amounts up to $60,000. So 60,000 is the max, but of course you're welcome to apply for less. And that goes for homeless shelters as well.
Perfect. And then a question from an animal shelter. Ashley asks, we are an animal shelter applying to help support the expansion of our existing program. About 25% of our clients are DV survivors. When requesting funds, should we limit requests to the amount expected we'll need solely for DV survivors' pets?
That is a great question. And the answer is yes. Thank you so much for asking this question. Yes, please focus on the domestic violence pets in your program and that applies to your budget ask as well.
Perfect. All right. Question from Amy. My organization provides services and transitional housing to women, most of whom are DV survivors, and their children. And we have always been pet friendly. We need to enhance some of our pet friendly housing with capital funds for new fencing, flooring, and other pet related renovations. Are we a good fit for funding?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for already accepting pets. That is amazing. We would like to see the capacity for pets expanded. So again, really look at your plans and see if there is a way that you can increase that capacity for pets within your ask.
Perfect. Thank you. Let's see. I've been skipping around a little bit in the questions, and so I'm just scrolling back up to see if I missed anyone. Let's see. We have a question, a couple questions from, I think, Sirik. But I can't totally understand what you're asking. Sirik, if you're still on, would you want to unmute to ask your questions to Rachel? One of the questions.
Yeah, so I think you actually just answered it. But I just through this, I haven't been entirely clear when we're talking about the homeless shelter grant or the DV grant. But I wanted to ask if we're applying for the homeless shelter grant, the number of pets that we are estimating for, yeah, let me look back at the note I was asking about. I wanted to essentially ask in terms of basically, is it the same for a homeless shelter grant that it needs to like have a big focus on pets from DV situations because we don't ask people if they don't want to disclose it if they come from a DV situation because we're not a DV shelter.
Sure. Yes. Thank you for asking that. That is a great
So
question.
I wasn't, would this require us to ask people and have them answer?
Yes, thank you for asking this, because I do want to clarify this. The homeless shelter grant is really separate from the domestic violence piece and grants. So no, you will not have to ask that information, and you will not have to focus only on domestic violence survivors and pets within your homeless shelter. It is encompassing of your entire homeless shelter. So we've just been focus on domestic violence, but we know there's lots of crossover. And so we're just excited and happy that we're able to expand to homeless shelters. But I see where the confusion would be because I see where the confusion would be. So the answer to you is no, you do not have to ask, and you do not have to focus only on TV pets.
Okay, so for the for Ashley's question about the requesting funds for a homeless shelter grant, it doesn't just have to be the amount expected for the pets of DV survivors. It can just be the amount expected for the pets entering our program.
Correct. Yes.
So I want to clarify, Ashley's question was from an animal shelter perspective. So it's a
Yes.
little different. So animal shelters are not, while animal shelters are eligible for safe housing funding for partnering with a DV shelter, correct me if I'm wrong, Rachel, they're not eligible for the homeless shelter funding because our homeless shelter grants, we require those programs to be on site only. So what will sometimes happen with a domestic violence shelter grant is, for whatever reason, a domestic violence shelter, maybe they're leasing their building and the owner of that building has a pet policy that they're not able to get around, a no pets policy. Maybe there are some other reasons about why they can't at this time have pets on site housed with the survivor. So what they will often do is partner with an animal shelter who provides off-site boarding. And that is the pet program that they create, that they apply for safe housing funds for. For the homeless shelter grant, that is not going to be an option at this time. We are requiring that all applicants for the homeless shelter grant be providing on-site housing services at the homeless shelter. So while Ashley was asking from an animal shelter perspective, it sounds like they house animals at their shelter, at their animal shelter, from people from a lot of experiencing a lot of different life events, right? Houselessness, maybe addiction treatment, maybe, hospitalization and DV. So for Ashley's question, for this grant, for the DV shelter grant, they do need to specifically only account for clients coming to them from DV situations for their grant application. For the homeless shelter grant, that's not the case. Anyone experiencing houselessness is sort of part of those numbers that you're pulling when you're trying to anticipate need. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Thank you, Danielle.
Absolutely. All right, everyone. Well, we're about 7 minutes past the hour, so I know we have a lot of great questions still left in the chat. Rachel, though, did share her email address in an earlier slide. I will be sending out a copy of the slides to everyone, so if you have a question that didn't get answered today, I am sure she would be happy to answer your question via email. You're also welcome to reach out to me at danielle@redrover.org. But for our last question, we just had a question about sort of that data collection piece, Rachel. So you mentioned for the grant application that you'd like to see shelters collecting some data, for example, on how many phone calls they're receiving from people who are requesting housing for their pets. How much time do they need to collect that data for? How many months of data collection do they need to show in their grant application?
Sure. I think that's really up to them. We're really looking for how did you come to the conclusion of the estimated number of pets you'll house per year? So ideally, I would say a year, but if you don't have that kind of time, 6 months is great too. We're just really looking to see how you came to that estimated pets number.
Wonderful. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so very much once again for joining us today. I see we're receiving lots of thank yous in the chat, Rachel. So thank you so much for your time and for all of the information that you shared today. Again, everyone who joined today will receive a follow-up email within the next few days with a link to this slide deck and a link to the recording of today's webinar. So you're welcome to watch it back or share it with your colleagues. Again, if you have any questions, you are welcome to reach out to Rachel or myself at Danielle at redrover.org. And thank you all once again so much for joining us today.
Thank you all so much for the amazing work that you're doing. And thank you so much for attending today.
Bye all.